Sarah Martinez had dreamed of becoming a Marine since she was 12 years old. Growing up in a small Texas town, she watched her older brother deploy overseas and return with stories that filled her with both pride and determination. At 19, she finally got her chance when she stepped off the bus at Marine Corps Recruit Depot Island, South Carolina. The humid air hit her like a wall as she joined the line of nervous recruits. Around her, young men and women from all walks of life shuffled their feet, clutching their few personal belongings. Sarah kept her chin up, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, trying to project the confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Listen up, maggots," the voice cut through the morning air like a knife. Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant Jackson emerged from the shadows of the barracks, his imposing frame casting a long shadow across the concrete. "You think you want to be Marines? You think you have what it takes to earn these Eagle, Globe, and Anchor?" Sarah's heart pounded as she took in her surroundings. The other recruits looked just as terrified as she felt, but she noticed something else in their eyes when they glanced her way. Doubt, skepticism. At 5 feet 4 inches and weighing barely 120 pounds, she was one of the smallest recruits in her platoon. The first few weeks of boot camp were a blur of early morning runs, endless push-ups, and drill instruction that seemed designed to break them down completely. Sarah pushed herself harder than anyone around her, determined to prove she belonged there. While other recruits collapsed during physical training, she kept going. When they struggled with their gear, she helped carry the extra weight. But the comments never stopped. "Hey, Tiny," called out recruit Phillips during chow time. "You sure you didn't get lost looking for Girl Scout camp?" The table erupted in snickers as Sarah quietly continued eating her meal. Recruit Torres, a stocky kid from Chicago, leaned over during weapons cleaning. "Martinez, my little sister could probably bench press more than you. What happens when you need to carry a wounded Marine to safety?" Even during combat training exercises, the whispers followed her. "She's going to get someone killed," muttered recruit after a particularly challenging obstacle course. "This isn't a game. Real Marines need real strength." Sarah absorbed every comment, every sideways glance, every moment of doubt from her fellow recruits. She used their skepticism as fuel, pushing herself to excel in every area of training. Her marksmanship scores were among the highest in the platoon. Her knowledge tests were flawless. Her uniform was always perfectly pressed, her bunk immaculate. Still, the physical challenges seemed insurmountable to her critics. During combat training, they learned hand-to-hand combat techniques. The Marine Corps Martial Arts program was designed to turn every Marine into a capable fighter, regardless of their background. Sarah had never mentioned her own background in martial arts to anyone. She had started taking karate classes when she was 7, after being bullied at school. By the time she graduated high school, she had earned a black belt in both karate and Brazilian. But she kept this information to herself, knowing that revealing it might seem like bragging or making excuses. She preferred to let her actions speak for themselves. The combat instructor, Sergeant Williams, was a mountain of a man who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. His reputation preceded him. He was known for being tough but fair, and for his incredible fighting skills that had saved his unit more than once overseas. At 6 feet 2 inches and weighing over 200 pounds of solid muscle, he was an intimidating presence even among the drill instructors. "Combat is the great equalizer," Sergeant Williams announced to the gathered recruits during their first martial arts session. "Size, strength, and speed all matter, but technique and heart matter more. In the field, you might face an enemy twice your size. Your life and the lives of your fellow Marines might depend on your ability to neutralize that threat." Sarah listened intently as he demonstrated various holds, strikes, and defensive maneuvers. Around her, the male recruits seemed confident, eager to prove their physical dominance. The whispers about her continued even here. "This should be interesting," Phillips muttered under his breath. "Maybe they'll pair her with someone her own size." But Sarah was studying every movement, every technique that Sergeant Williams demonstrated. Her years of training had taught her that martial arts was about leverage, timing, and precision rather than brute force. She watched as the instructor showed them how to escape from various holds, how to use an opponent's momentum against them. During partner drills, Sarah was consistently underestimated. Her partners approached each exercise with casual confidence, assuming that her size meant she would be easy to overpower. Time and again, she surprised them with her technique and balance, but she held back from showing her full capabilities. "Not bad, Martinez," Sergeant Williams observed during one session. "You've got good instincts. Have you had any training before?" "Some, Sergeant," Sarah replied simply, not wanting to make a big deal of her extensive background. The weeks continued, and the taunting persisted. During field exercises, when the recruits were dirty, exhausted, and pushed to their limits, the comments became more pointed. "Face it, Martinez," Torres said during a rest break. "You might be able to keep up now, but what happens in real combat? What happens when bullets are flying and you need to carry a 200-pound Marine to safety? Good intentions don't make up for physics." Sarah remained silent, but inside, her determination grew stronger. She had faced doubt and skepticism her entire life. Teachers who thought she was too quiet to be a leader. Coaches who thought she was too small to be competitive. Even family members who worried that the military would be too demanding for someone her size. But she had also learned that the loudest voices weren't always the strongest, and that true strength came in many forms. The training intensified as the weeks progressed. Combat exercises became more complex, incorporating multiple fighting techniques and scenarios that simulated real combat situations. Sarah continued to excel in areas that didn't rely purely on physical size: her accuracy with weapons, her ability to think strategically under pressure, her attention to detail in planning and executing missions. Yet the whispers persisted, and she could sense that some of her fellow recruits still saw her as a liability rather than an asset. Everything was building toward a moment that Sarah could feel approaching, a moment when she would need to prove herself once and for all. She had no idea that this moment would come sooner than expected, and in a way that would leave everyone speechless. The morning of the advanced combat demonstration dawned gray and humid. Week 10 of boot camp had arrived, and the recruits were scheduled for their most challenging hand-to-hand combat assessment yet. Sarah woke before reveille, as had become her habit, using the quiet moments to mentally prepare for whatever the day would bring. In the mess hall, the atmosphere was different. The recruits had grown more confident over the weeks, but they had also become more polarized in their opinions about who belonged among them. The comments about Sarah had evolved from casual teasing to more serious concerns about unit effectiveness. "I'm just saying," spoke quietly to a group gathered around his table. "When we're in the field, we need to know everyone can handle themselves. It's not personal against Martinez, but facts are facts." Sarah sat at a nearby table with the few recruits who had become her genuine friends: Jackson from Alabama, who appreciated her help with academics, and from California, who had witnessed her quiet competence in countless exercises. They didn't join in the speculation about her capabilities, but Sarah could see the concern in their eyes, too. After breakfast, the platoon assembled in the combat training facility. The space was larger than their usual training area, with thick mats covering the floor and equipment arranged around the perimeter. Sergeant Williams stood at the center, looking even more imposing than usual in the morning light filtering through the high windows. "Today we're going to test everything you've learned about hand-to-hand combat," he announced. "This isn't just about technique anymore. It's about applying what you know under pressure against opponents who won't go easy on you." He gestured to a group of assistant instructors who had joined them. "These Marines have volunteered to help demonstrate advanced techniques. They're not going to hold back, and neither should you. Combat is unpredictable. Your opponent might be bigger, stronger, or more experienced. Your job is to adapt and overcome." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Around her, the other recruits were stretching and mentally preparing. The whispers had died down, replaced by the focused tension that preceded any major test. "We'll start with volunteer demonstrations," Sergeant Williams continued. "I need someone confident enough to show the platoon what they've learned by sparring with me." The silence stretched for several seconds. Sparring with the combat instructor was not the same as partner drills with fellow recruits. Sergeant Williams was a seasoned combat veteran with years of advanced training. He outweighed most of the recruits by 50 pounds or more. "Come on," he said, scanning the group. "Someone step up. Phillips, you've been talking about your wrestling background. Torres, you mentioned boxing experience." But the previously confident recruits suddenly found the floor very interesting. The reality of facing their intimidating instructor had dampened their enthusiasm for demonstrating their skills. "I'll volunteer, Sergeant," Sarah's voice cut through the uncomfortable silence. The reaction was immediate. Heads snapped toward her in surprise. A few recruits exchanged glances that clearly said this should be interesting in the most skeptical way possible. Sergeant Williams studied her for a moment. "Martinez, are you sure about this? This isn't a drill. I'm going to come at you like a real opponent." "Yes, Sergeant," Sarah replied, stepping forward onto the mat. "I understand." The platoon formed a circle around the mat, and Sarah could hear the whispered conversations starting up again. "This is going to be ugly," someone muttered. "Poor girl doesn't know what she's gotten herself into. Williams is going to destroy her." Sarah blocked out the commentary and focused on her breathing, the way she had been taught years ago in her first martial arts class. She centered herself, feeling the familiar calm that came before competition. This was what she had been training for her entire life, even if she hadn't known it at the time. Sergeant Williams removed his drill instructor cover and loosened his uniform slightly. "Remember, Marines," he called out to the watching recruits, "size and strength are advantages, but they're not everything. Watch how Martinez moves, see how she positions herself." Sarah appreciated that he was trying to make this a teaching moment rather than just a spectacle, but she could still feel the skepticism radiating from most of her platoon. "Ready, Martinez." "Ready, Sergeant." Williams moved forward with surprising speed for his size, reaching out to grab Sarah in a standard grappling approach. It was exactly the kind of attack that would overwhelm most opponents through pure physical dominance. But Sarah wasn't there when his hands arrived. She had shifted her weight and stepped aside at precisely the right moment, using his forward momentum to pull him further off balance than he had intended to go. It was a subtle movement that happened so quickly that some of the watching recruits weren't sure what they had seen. Williams recovered immediately, as Sarah had expected he would. He was far too experienced to be thrown off by one evasive maneuver. He circled her now with more respect, reassessing his approach. "Good footwork," he acknowledged, "but avoiding contact won't win a fight." He came in again, this time with a combination of strikes and grappling that was designed to overwhelm her defenses. Sarah absorbed the attack, deflecting what she could and accepting the contact that she couldn't avoid. But instead of trying to match his strength directly, she worked with the physics of their interaction. When he pushed, she pulled. When he pulled, she pushed. She stayed close to him, inside his reach where his size advantage was minimized, and she kept moving so that he couldn't set his stance and apply his full power. The watching recruits had grown quiet. What they were seeing wasn't the mismatch they had expected. Sarah wasn't winning, but she wasn't being dominated either. She was making Sergeant Williams work harder than anyone had anticipated. "She's actually holding her own," whispered to Jackson. "How is she doing that?" Torres asked, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. Sarah could sense the shift in the room's energy, but she couldn't afford to be distracted by it. Williams was increasing the intensity of his attacks, and she was beginning to feel the strain of constantly having to be faster and more technical than her opponent. Then Williams made a mistake. It was a small one. He slightly to a takedown attempt, putting himself momentarily off balance. In that instant, Sarah saw an opportunity that her years of training had taught her to recognize and exploit without hesitation. She dropped her center of gravity, got underneath his extended arm, and used his own momentum combined with a perfectly timed hip throw to send all 220 pounds of Sergeant Williams sailing through the air. The impact of his body hitting the mat echoed through the suddenly silent training facility. Sarah had dropped the combat instructor with one perfectly executed technique. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, nobody moved. Williams lay on the mat, not unconscious but clearly winded and surprised. Sarah stood ready, having immediately assumed a defensive position in case he got back up quickly. But Sergeant Williams didn't get up immediately. He lay there for several seconds, staring at the ceiling, processing what had just happened. The recruits stood frozen around the mat, their minds struggling to process what they had witnessed. This was their combat instructor, a man who had survived multiple combat deployments, who had trained thousands of Marines, who was known throughout the base for his fighting skills. And Sarah Martinez, the smallest recruit in their platoon, had just put him on his back with what looked like minimal effort. Sergeant Williams slowly sat up on the mat, shaking his head with what looked like a mixture of surprise and admiration. The entire training facility remained eerily quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath waiting to see how the instructor would react to being taken down by a recruit. "Well," Williams said finally, getting to his feet and dusting off his uniform, "that's how you use technique over strength." He looked directly at Sarah, who was still in her defensive stance. "Outstanding work, Martinez. Where did you learn to do that?" Sarah relaxed slightly but maintained her military bearing. "I've been studying martial arts since I was a child, Sergeant, karate and Brazilian." A murmur rippled through the circle of recruits. Suddenly, Sarah's performance made more sense, but it also raised new questions about why she had never mentioned this background before. "How long?" Williams asked, genuinely curious now. 12 years, Sergeant, black belt in both disciplines." Williams nodded slowly, processing this information. "And you never thought to mention this during our previous training sessions?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering. "I didn't want special treatment, Sergeant. I wanted to earn my place here like everyone else." The instructor studied her for a long moment, then turned to address the entire platoon. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Never assume you know someone's capabilities based on what you can see on the surface." Martinez could have been bragging about her background from day one, but instead she chose to prove herself through her actions. He gestured for Sarah to demonstrate the throw again, this time breaking it down step by step for the other recruits to learn. As she explained the mechanics of leverage, timing, and using an opponent's momentum against them, Sarah could see the faces around her changing from skepticism to respect. "The beautiful thing about this technique," Williams added as Sarah demonstrated, "is that it doesn't depend on being stronger than your opponent. It depends on being smarter and more skilled. This is exactly the kind of thinking that will keep you alive in combat and make you effective Marines." Phillips, who had been one of Sarah's most vocal critics, raised his hand. "Sergeant, does this mean that size and strength don't matter at all?" "Good question, Phillips. Size and strength absolutely matter. They're significant advantages in most situations, but they're not everything. Martinez has spent years developing skills that allow her to overcome those physical disadvantages. The lesson here isn't that technique always beats strength. It's that you need to develop every advantage you can get." Williams turned back to Sarah. "Martinez, I want you to work with some of the other recruits on these techniques. Share what you know. That's what Marines do. We make each other stronger." Over the following weeks, something fundamental changed in how Sarah's platoon viewed her. The whispered doubts about her capabilities disappeared, replaced by genuine respect for her skills and dedication. But more importantly, the other recruits began seeking her out for training and advice. Torres, who had questioned her ability to carry a wounded Marine, approached her after a particularly challenging obstacle course. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I was focused on what you couldn't do instead of seeing what you could do. That was wrong of me." Sarah accepted his apology graciously, and soon found herself helping him improve his own hand-to-hand combat techniques. Her patient instruction and willingness to share her knowledge won over even her harshest critics, who had worried about unit effectiveness, discovered that Sarah's analytical approach to problem-solving made her an excellent tactical partner. Her ability to assess situations quickly and find unconventional solutions became an asset to the entire squad during training exercises. But perhaps the most significant change was in how Sarah viewed herself within the group. She had always known she was capable, but proving it to others had given her a confidence that went beyond individual achievement. She began taking on more leadership roles, speaking up during planning sessions, and offering to help struggling recruits in areas beyond martial arts. Sergeant Williams began using Sarah as an example during his classes with other platoons. "I've got a recruit who weighs 120 pounds soaking wet," he would tell them, "and she put me on my back because she understood that fighting isn't about being the biggest person in the room. It's about being the and most prepared." Word of the incident spread throughout the base. Other drill instructors came by to watch Sarah demonstrate techniques, and she found herself teaching classes for recruits from other platoons. Her expertise became a resource for the entire training program. The taunting that had followed Sarah through the early weeks of boot camp became a distant memory. In its place was something she valued much more, the genuine respect of her peers and instructors. When other recruits talked about her now, it was about her skills, her dedication, and her willingness to help others improve. As graduation approached, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that humid morning when she first stepped off the bus at Island. She had come expecting to prove herself, but she had learned something more valuable. That true strength came not from overpowering others, but from lifting them up. During their final week of training, Sergeant Williams pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Martinez, I want you to know that what you did that day was about more than just a good throw. You showed this entire platoon that Marines come in all shapes and sizes, but what makes us Marines is up here." He tapped his temple. "And in here," he pointed to his chest. "Thank you, Sergeant," Sarah replied. "This place taught me that too. I've put in a recommendation for you to attend advanced martial arts instructor training after you complete your military occupational specialty school. The Corps needs more people who can teach these skills effectively." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but also responsibility. She had learned that her abilities weren't just personal achievements. They were tools she could use to make other Marines better, stronger, and more effective. On graduation day, as Sarah stood in formation wearing the eagle, globe, and anchor that she had dreamed of earning since she was 12 years old, she thought about the journey that had brought her there. The taunts and doubts that had seemed so overwhelming just months before now felt like distant challenges that had helped forge her into the Marine she had become. Phillips, now genuinely friendly, leaned over during a quiet moment in the ceremony. "Martinez, I'm glad I was wrong about you. This unit is stronger because you're in it." Sarah smiled, but her mind was already focused forward. Boot camp was over, but her real service as a Marine was just beginning. She had proven that she belonged here, but more importantly, she had learned how to help others find their own strength and confidence. The small-town girl from Texas who had stepped off that bus filled with determination and dreams was gone. In her place stood Marine Private First Class Sarah Martinez, a warrior who understood that the greatest victories weren't just about defeating opponents, but about building up the people fighting beside you. As the ceremony concluded and the new Marines celebrated their achievement, Sarah knew that the moment she had dropped Sergeant Williams on that training mat would be remembered and retold for years to come. But she also knew that the real victory wasn't in that single demonstration of skill. It was in everything that came after, when she used that moment to make herself and everyone around her better Marines. The doubters had been silenced, but more importantly,